Good evening, thank you for your company. Tonight, New Zealand has some of the worst child abuse statistics in the Western world, but why? Lynched starts right now. Good evening. Sadly, New Zealand's broken family culture continues to make it into the media spotlight with child abuse stories that have become all too familiar. In a positive development at least, last week a 22-year-old was charged with the murder of a 15-month-old baby boy. The toddler who died in hospital was the victim of a sustained and brutal assault. Detective Inspector Greg Merton told the media the assault was the worst he's seen in his police career. The scene examination and post-mortem results confirmed the baby was, and I quote, the victim of an extremely violent assault or assaults and subsequently died of his injuries. A funeral was held for the little boy before an arrest was eventually made. This is not the first and won't be the last time we hear about the death of a baby. According to Child Matters organisation, New Zealand has the 5th worst child abuse record out of the 31 OECD countries. Now, tragically, on average, one child is killed every 5 weeks. Most of these children are under 5 and the largest group is less than a year old. 90% of all child deaths are perpetrated by someone the child knew. So where is New Zealand going wrong? Well, throwing more cash at reactive agencies in my view won't help, nor will throwing more cash at young parents. They don't need more incentives to have babies. What young people need is strong education. And if it can't start at home, then it must start at school. Heck, we're providing breakfast and lunch. Chances are if the children aren't getting fed at home, they're hardly going to be getting the best life skills either. Sex education is important, particularly given the constant liberalisation of the media that pushes the sexualisation of just about anything that moves into the faces of young children. But sex education, in my view, should also teach the difficulties of massive sacrifices that go with bringing babies into the world. Now, the government claims it's on the right track. It says reducing violence against children is a top priority and has set some rather interesting targets. By 2017, it intends to halt the 10-year rise in children experiencing physical abuse. Now, in a recent government report, it says it wants to bring that projected number of 4,000 children expected to experience some form of physical abuse down to just under 3,000. But why not go for a zero-tolerance approach? Of course, it's unrealistic to expect people not to kill their own children. It happens. But surely the target should be 0. In many documented child abuse cases, it's a family member who ends up in the dock, a person usually from a broken home. Not always, but sometimes. Now, I'm not a huge advocate for marriage, and it's none of my business if a young couple decides to marry or not, but there's something to be said about a stable family environment. As Dr. Patrick F. Fagan from the Heritage Foundation in America says, the breakdown of relationships and the lack of commitment to love is spreading like a cancer from poor communities to working class communities. It's time to get back to basics. Now, I received a fascinating call from a talkback caller on my News Talk ZB show last week. Now, she works with child abuse victims, and she said, as a society, we're losing interest in our neighbours. She's so right. We're losing our village and community-minded mentality, if you like. If we hear a scream next door, we're more inclined to close our windows than to check to see if everything is okay. Does this ring true for you? In a way, it's not that we're scared to help, it's just that we're scared to be seen to be helping, and that's got to change, it really does. As social workers, community leaders and lawmakers think of ways to stop child abuse, they must focus, in my view, their attention on the disintegration of family. An educational campaign that outlines strong family standards is a must in the fight against child abuse. And joining me now for a reaction to this and other matters is Edwina Pointer from the Chumley Children's Home in Christchurch. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
I know you don't know everything. I know this is a really tricky, sensitive subject. You work in the sector, if I can call it that.
Yeah.
We've seen that the child abuse statistics in New Zealand are appalling, some of the worst in the Western world.
Yeah.
I know it's a hard question to ask, but where are we going wrong? Why is this, do you think?
Well, I really can't, unfortunately, answer that question, but I can reiterate what you said in your opening piece, that we have got some of the highest figures. We're actually 3rd highest behind America and Mexico.
The 3rd highest?
We're the 3rd highest for child deaths, child homicides. So what I will say is that there's no easy or simple solution to this. It's a really, really complex issue. But it's also for all of us we've all got a part to play in this. It is for government and government policy, it's for education, it's for health, it's for social service sector, but it's also for all of us as a community as well to actually think of ways of how we can do this. I think there's a real risk that we get bogged down in the culture of blaming people around this, and I think that could so easily stop us looking for and finding the solutions. So it is about us all really working together.
When you say about us all working together, I know you talk about a multi-society approach. It's not just the government policies, it's next neighbours. Do you think in a way that talkback caller who works in the child abuse sector, if I can call it that, has an interesting point that in some ways we have lost our ability to connect with one another. We were so good during the earthquakes.
Absolutely.
But if we do hear a scream next door, it is easier to close the window and think, oh, be quiet, than it is to see if that person's okay. Because as Kiwis, we are scared about getting involved, aren't we?
Yes, absolutely. And I think your caller is absolutely right, and it's certainly something that we do talk about within the sector. And it is a need for us to get back to feeling that valuing children as part of our community. They're the most vulnerable people within our community. And we really do, as a society, need to think of it like that, and to be able to stand up and speak out for children where things aren't going right, and speak out for families who are struggling, and advocating for them to be safe and to be getting a better service and to be having a safer life.
It is so sad when I was looking at some of the comments on my public Facebook page about the various deaths that we've experienced in New Zealand of recent months. And I couldn't help but notice, and forgive me for using this word, it's almost a, how do I put this nicely? There seems to be a whole culture, a sort of an underbelly of people who perhaps aren't as well educated than what perhaps you and I are used to, what we see in our, well, perhaps not for you, but our everyday lives. There is I'm increasingly seeing a worrying trend of very, very young girls with babies, and their level of education doesn't seem to be all that flash, if you get what I'm saying. I mean, it almost seems to be an underbelly, a culture that perhaps we don't want to know that it exists in Christchurch, but boy, oh boy, does it exist. Do you sort of understand what I'm getting at? I'm trying to be sensitive here.
What I would say is that we have got lots of young women who have babies and are actually doing incredibly well. And I wouldn't like us to think that it's only happening, that abuse and maltreatment of children is only happening within families where there are young mums. There are a lot of young mums who are doing really well. But what I would say is that the research does tell us that children who are brought up in families where both parents are caring for them, those children do have better outcomes. But there are many, many factors. These are very, very complex situations, and there are many, many factors that impact on people's capacity to parent. And whether that be family violence, drug and alcohol issues, their parental mental health can impact on how people parent their children. So it's incredibly complex. And I think that what does tend to happen is we tend to hear about those families, like young mums who are having the babies, where it's going wrong, but actually there are a lot of them who are doing really well out there.
I suppose as the media we only hear the tragedies, the awful stories.
The awful stories.
So perhaps you can give us some context, because obviously working in the media, what we tend to hear is the worst case scenarios. We hear about the kahawis, we hear about the neoclassies, we hear about this, this other case in Brimble, we hear about another case in Wellington. There is a common theme. There is a common theme. Is there one tragic theme that you see in your capacity as a practitioner? There must be something that a lot of these cases all have in common. I know it's very complex, but is there a running theme that you pick up working in this sector where you go, here we go again?
I think it very often is happening in families where families are feeling isolated, they're feeling marginalised, they're possibly not getting the services and the supports that they need in order that they can care for the children in the way that they need to care for their children. It's
very interesting you say that, not unlike the earthquakes, when a lot of vulnerable people don't actually realise there is a lot of help available. There's actually a lot of non-governmental agencies and social services for free that is available, but it's either reaching out or knowing those services are actually there to help. Is that the same with what you think people experience here?
Yeah, I do. And I think sometimes that people are possibly afraid to approach agencies as well to actually gain that help. Something else I would just like to say is that I think that whilst we talk about the very tragic deaths that we see that are absolutely appalling, I think we need to be mindful that there are levels of abuse, different levels of abuse that go on in many families, and it's not just the families of children where there are, there are broken homes or things like that, that abuse does go on in other families too. And I think we need to be really clear that we don't miss that by just focusing on the harder end of what happens for children.
I think I want to pick you up on that after the break. I think it's very important to know the signs and what other abuse you're actually meaning. Do stay with us. You're watching Lynched on CTV. Welcome back to Lynched on CTV. My guest tonight is Edwina Poynton from Cholmondeley in Christchurch. Good to have you on the program, really appreciate it. It's an awful subject to talk about child abuse, but it is one that I think we need to have a discussion about, sadly. I want to pick you up on something interesting you said before the break, and I think you're right. It's not just about looking at the hard end of child abuse, because in order to establish or see that awful outcome, you need to look further inland, so to speak, and look at some of the other abuse that's going on that I suppose, for want of a better word, could be mild but can end to that awful result. What did you mean by that? Can you elaborate on that for us, please?
Well, I guess it's being mindful that abuse or maltreatment of children or neglect of children can happen right across our spectrum of the community. It can happen in families who are to get parents being together. It can happen in families from right across the socioeconomic spectrum, right across the cultural spectrum, and so I think it's about all of us as a community being open to supporting children who we come across in our communities who may be being treated like that. So it's about us as a society being able to stand up and value children and actually support children who might be in that position. So looking at our own families, looking at our own extended family and whānau, looking at what's happening in our own community and being able to actually say that's not okay for that child and being able to speak up for that child.
Do you think, answer the question, do you think as a community, as a society, we value children enough by what we read, what we see, what we do, what's available to children?
I believe that we have a long way to go in terms of really valuing children as being the treasures that they are and putting them central to what we do.
What do you say that?
We very often become quite adult-centric, so lots of the decisions that we make are based around what the adults' needs are. I believe that we really need to be moving towards having an environment where we are much more focused on what is right for children and creating environments where children will be able to grow and be nurtured and to become, and to have childhoods and then become the adults that we want them to be as part of our society and people who are really contributing. And part of that actually within our city at the moment is there is discussion about Christchurch becoming a child and youth friendly city, which is really, really exciting, and I think that's a space that we all should be watching and encouraging to happen.
Is that because in a way as some adults can be selfish, or is it just because when they have a young child, perhaps unexpectedly, it becomes an inconvenience?
Well, I guess there's that. There's also the bit of all of us as adults, whether we have children or not. I think we can miss the point about what is needed for children. But I think certainly, I think anybody who has children knows that it can be a very rewarding and fun experience, but it also can be extremely challenging at times. And I think if you've got the added issues, I guess, of maybe not having access to resources, not having access to money, maybe living in situations that aren't ideal, then obviously the stress levels are going to rise even more. So it does make it very often difficult to parent children. So it's about us getting supports around those people so that they can do that to the best of their ability. I've worked with children and families for almost 30 years, and I can honestly say that the majority of parents want what's best for their children and for their child. But sometimes there are things that get in the way, so it's for the rest of us in society to actually be supporting those people so as they can meet the needs of their child.
Let's talk about love, if we can. And I say that sincerely because I wonder how much love is involved in some of the awful, horrific child abuse cases we see in families. And of course, we can only speculate. And without sounding like some conservative person from 1940, I wonder how much value we place on marriage and whether you believe, is it too simplistic to suggest that if there's a loving relationship from two parents, then that's going to increase the chances of a better dynamic within a family? I know not always, but is there something to be said for a stable family environment that includes mum or dad or whatever the parents are, choose to be, you know?
I believe that it's not really about marriage. It is about that stable relationship that you're talking about. So it is about relationship. So, and it's about that relationship then providing an environment where that child feels loved, safe, feels nurtured, and is able to grow and to thrive.
Are there warning signs to see if that child is getting all that? Thriving, being loved? Are there warning signs we can all look out for?
Absolutely.
What?
I think we can see it in the children who we come across on a daily basis. We can tell by the interaction between a parent and a child. We can very often see it in a child, the child who might be withdrawn and feeling really sad, or the child possibly who's acting out. Now it's really complex. It's not as simple as us doing a tick box with one or two of those things. It's really complex. But I think we can spot the children who are feeling very valued and feeling very loved and how they thrive. But I also would like to say that it's about the relationship for the child is the key to their well-being, and whether that relationship is whether it's a solo parent or whether it's a grandparent raising their grandchild or whether it's a heterosexual couple or it's a gay couple bringing up a child, so long as there's love. Absolutely, and so long as whatever decisions are made and however they're interacting with each other, it's the child's well-being is at the centre of what they're doing.
I want to pick you up on that after the break. We want to discuss the child's well-being and just some of those important advice or tips to look out for children, that we can all do that. Stay with us. You're watching Lynched on CTV. Welcome back to the programme. My guest tonight is Edwina Poynton from Cholmondeley, and great to have you with us. I just want to pick you up on some of those warning signs. We are obviously discussing child abuse, a very sensitive subject on the programme tonight. And I know it's a complex situation and it's very different for everybody, but as a teacher, a parent, a neighbour, anybody, we can all do slightly more, can't we? Give us some of those warning signs.
Well, I guess it's the child who may be withdrawn. But then there may be other reasons. I mean, I'm a bit reluctant to talk about exactly what the signs might be, and only because it can be very complex. A child can be withdrawn for other reasons, and we can really risk jumping to the conclusion that there's something going on. But what I would say is that I think what all adults can do is get alongside children. So it's about building relationship with the children. It's actually about learning about their world, learning about what their strengths are, what they enjoy doing, and learning about how life is for them. And that's about us having conversations. That's about us getting alongside them. It's about listening to them and really hearing what they have to say. So they're the ways that we can all start to really help and support children more in our society.
I wonder if we're, as we said before, I wonder if we are losing that a little bit with busy lifestyles.
Absolutely.
Not as much patience as we used to have. Not as much educational television programs aimed at children because it doesn't make money, doesn't get the ratings up.
Yeah.
Do you think all of this is playing an awful part in the way we're seeing children?
Well,
because we see, like in my industry, you know, we see children as a commodity, for example. The days of a lot of educational children's television, which happens to be my background, you don't see much of it anymore because it doesn't make money in New Zealand anymore. There's no money to be made in kids' telly.
Right.
should that be the way we're thinking?
No, definitely not.
If we care about our society, do you know what I mean?
Definitely not. And again, that's where very often we become so sort of, it's adult-centric. And I know things have to be driven by budgets and such like, but if we were to flip that round and actually think about the value that children would get out of us providing them with services, whether that's television or anything else, that it's actually about putting them at the centre of what we do.
I want to talk about sex education. It was at the top of my opinion piece.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the fact that we teach children, you know, how to not get an STD, how to not get pregnant, but, and it may have changed since I was at Burnside High, but there was never a focus on life skills.
Yeah.
Here's the responsibility that goes with something as massive as having a child.
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
Do you think?
I know there's a great debate about whether schools should be talking about sex education or going into any deeper things around that.
Oh, about the pleasure zones. Let's talk about what that's going to create, shouldn't we? Not about whether they were feeling good about it.
I think the ideal is that we have parents at home talking about, having the conversations there, but I think that schools and teachers have a really important part to play in this, and in particular as schools are such influential places for children. But I think alongside the talking about the physical aspects and talking about giving the safe sex messages, we absolutely should be talking about the life skills, talking about communication, talking about respect, talking about love. So as young people are coming out with a much wider understanding of negotiating relationships and negotiating their world. And I think the other side to that is thinking about the impact of having babies and having children. And I do believe that that having some form of education in schools around what babies and children need in order for them to thrive. I think of an organisation such as the Brainwave Trust. They provide some fantastic training for people, not just young people in schools, but I believe that people right across society should be looking at what they're talking about in terms of what children and babies need in order that they can thrive. So that sort of information being put into schools, I think, would be just fantastic.
It almost seems like the school-based curriculum needs to be continuously being updated with just what's being out there. I mean, when we were at school, there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, our television was pretty much a couple of channels. We didn't have as much sexualisation as we do today now, which I think probably plays a part in every teenager feeling stressed. And what do you think?
Yeah, well, certainly that's what I'm seeing and I'm hearing too from what is going on out there. But it's great to see that there are organisations out there that are helping schools with organisations such as NetSafe. They're actually helping schools with supporting children and young people in how to negotiate that world. And you're right, it's so different from when we were younger and what was happening then.
No pressures on Facebook or putting your... And I think this plays it can be helpful, but I think it could also be... It's a double-edged sword, isn't it, this social media stuff? Yeah. Just to find a few comments before we have to wrap the show. I know you talked at the start of the program about sort of a multi-society approach. Do you think we'll get there? I know you look into that crystal ball right next to you now. Do you think we will... will the appalling rates of child abuse in this country, do you think they'll ever come down? And what will it take?
I believe they will, because I think there is a real will for that to happen. And I think there are, certainly it's about government policy, but it's also about health, education. It's about all of the sectors, social service sector, the community sector, all working together in order for this to happen. And it's not just a SIFS or a child, youth and family issue, it's actually for all of us to consider. It's a community issue, and it's a community responsibility. I think about the saying, it takes a village to raise a child, and certainly we talk a lot about that at Cholmondeley. And I truly believe that is what is going to make a difference in society, is if we all take some responsibility for what is happening for children. And indeed, in countries where they have taken on that sort of stance, both in legislation and also in society thinking, in society values, they've really made inroads and have reduced their statistics. Well,
thank goodness there's some hope. We're out of time. Between a point from Cholmondeley. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming to the program.
Nice to see you too.
You were fine. Trust me, it was a good interview. I enjoyed it. Thank you for your
Was it
time.
all right?
It was fine.
Oh.
And that is our show for tonight. Just a quick note, I'm away tomorrow for News Talks AB, but Richard Green is in the hot seat. I'll see you back on News Talks AB on Wednesday. But from all of us here at CTV, have a good evening.